The highway stretched ahead like a black ribbon unraveling into the unknown, its cracked asphalt glowing dully under the pale headlights of Mike's old Chevy Impala. The night was thick, pressing in around them, swallowing the world beyond the narrow beam of their high beams. The only company on the road was the occasional rusted road sign, their faded letters barely legible, eaten away by time and neglect. Mike gripped the wheel with one hand, his fingers drumming idly on the dashboard. Tom slouched in the passenger seat, his hoodie pulled over his head, eyes flicking between the rearview mirror and the endless darkness outside. The road felt empty, too empty, as if no one had driven it in years. The radio crackled softly in the background, a faint hum of music drifting through the static. "We're coming up next, an old classic." The voice of the late-night DJ fizzled into white noise, the song never reaching their ears. Mike frowned and twisted the knob. The static cleared for a moment, a faint, ghostly tune creeping through. Then, another interruption. This time it wasn't static, it was a whisper. Low, distant, just at the edge of perception. A murmur, like voices buried under layers of white noise. Tom stiffened. "Did you hear that?" Mike shook his head. "Just interference. This place is the middle of nowhere." And it was. Outside the car windows, the world had become a wasteland of forgotten things. Crumbling motels with flickering neon signs spelled half-lit words that made no sense. Vacancy. Blinked erratically on a skeletal building, where every window gaped dark and hollow. A rusted gas station stood on the roadside, its pumps long dry, its signs swinging weakly in the wind, screeching wham with every movement. An old diner sat in the distance, its front window shattered, a single booth dimly illuminated by a failing overhead bulb. The deeper they drove, the worse it got. Cars sat abandoned on the shoulder, their doors wide open as if their occupants had fled mid-drive. Some were stripped to their frames, rusting skeletons of metal. Others looked frozen in time, headlights dead, windshield wipers still raised as if against a rain that never came. The night pressed heavier, the static on the radio swelled. And then, laughter. Faint, distant, mixed in with the interference. Mike turned the dial frantically. Nothing. Just the road ahead, just the night, swallowing them whole. Tom exhaled slowly. "Maybe we should turn back." Mike didn't answer. He just pressed down on the gas. And the highway carried them forward. The road ahead stretched on, a black void carved into the night. The car's headlights slashed through the darkness, illuminating patches of cracked asphalt and ghostly remnants of the past. Another gas station, long abandoned, its windows gaping like empty eye sockets. A tattered billboard loomed over them, its peeling paint barely revealing a forgotten advertisement for a motel that likely didn't exist anymore. Then they saw him. A figure stood on the shoulder of the road, barely visible against the night. He was still, too still, like a statue that had been left there for decades, waiting. Mike's hands tensed on the wheel. Tom shifted in his seat. "The hell is he doing out here?" Tom muttered. The hitchhiker didn't move as they approached. His silhouette was tall and thin, his posture rigid. A hood covered most of his face, casting it into deep shadow, but his hands, pale and motionless, hung limply at his sides. He wore an old, tattered coat, frayed at the edges, and his jeans were stained with something dark. The car slowed almost instinctively. "Don't!" Tom said quickly, his voice edged with unease, but Mike had already made up his mind. "Come on, man, he's just a guy. We can't leave him out here in the middle of nowhere." Tom didn't answer, just exhaled sharply as Mike pulled over. The hitchhiker stepped forward, slow and deliberate. The way he moved was unsettling, too smooth, too practiced, like he had been expecting them. He reached the car without hesitation and opened the back door. He slid in without a word. The smell hit them immediately. It wasn't sweat or dirt like they expected from a drifter. It was something old, a damp, mouldy scent like rotting wood or wet earth. It clung to the air, thick and suffocating. Mike swallowed hard and checked the mirror. The hitchhiker sat stiffly in the back seat, his face still lost in shadow. Where you headed?" Mike asked, forcing a casual tone. Silence. Tom turned slightly, his face pale. "Dude." Nothing. The hitchhiker just sat there, his head slightly tilted forward as if listening. The radio crackled. More static. Mike turned the dial, searching for something, anything to break the silence. The static cleared for a moment, and a song briefly emerged, a slow, warbling tune from decades past, like an old vinyl playing in another room. But then just as quickly, the voices returned, faint, whispering beneath the music. Not words. Not in any language they recognized. Mike turned the dial again, but the whispers only grew louder, twisting through the static like something alive. Then a breath, not from the radio, from the back seat, a slow, deep inhale, like someone savoring the air. Tom went rigid. "Pull over," he said suddenly. Mike glanced at him. "What? Pull over, now!" Mike hesitated. A voice, low, scratchy, broke the silence. "Keep driving." Both of them froze. The hitchhiker had finally spoken. His voice was wrong, too deep, layered, like there was something else beneath it, something inhuman. Mike's hands tightened on the wheel. His foot hovered over the brake, but something in his gut screamed at him not to stop. Tom slowly turned his head toward the back seat. The hitchhiker was leaning forward now, closer. His face was still hidden, but something shifted in the darkness of his hood. A glimpse of something unnatural. Something that wasn't a face at all. Tom's breath hitched. "Mike," he whispered, "drive." Mike slammed his foot on the gas. The Impala roared forward, tires screeching against the cracked asphalt. The radio let out a piercing shriek of static before cutting to silence. For a moment, neither of them breathed. Then, a sound, a soft, wet chuckle, coming from the back seat. Tom refused to turn around. Mike kept his eyes on the road, his pulse hammering in his ears. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, and with every second that passed, the air in the car grew colder. They had picked up something that was a man, and it was still with them, watching, waiting. The night swallowed them whole. The car sped down the desolate stretch of Route 66, swallowed by the endless night. Mike's knuckles were white against the steering wheel, his breath shallow. The road was silent, except for the hum of the tires against the cracked asphalt. The hitchhiker had stopped speaking, if that distorted thing he had uttered could even be called speech. But the weight of his presence filled the car like a thick fog. Tom hadn't moved since they'd sped off, sitting rigidly in his seat, staring dead ahead. Neither of them dared to look back. But then something changed. A flicker of motion, a shift in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. Mike caught it in his peripheral vision and frowned. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. And his stomach dropped. The hitchhiker sat there, unmoving, silent. But something was wrong. He had no shadow. The Impala's interior light cast long, slanted shadows across the dashboard, Tom's silhouette stretching across the door, even Mike's own faint outline reflecting against the windshield. But in the back seat, nothing. The hitchhiker was a void, a shape without depth, like a cutout in reality itself. Mike's pulse thundered, a cold sweat trickled down the back of his neck. He swallowed hard, voice barely steady. "Tom," he murmured. Tom didn't answer at first. Then, after a long moment, his voice came out, hoarse and forced. "I know." Mike darted a glance at him. I saw it the second he got in," Tom admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just didn't want to say anything." The radio crackled again, sputtering to life with another burst of static. But this time, there was no music. Only breathing, heavy, wet, right against the speakers. Mike shivered, his mind racing. And then he remembered something. A story, a damn urban legend, something he had once laughed about over beers with friends. He forced out a dry chuckle, though it sounded weak. "You ever hear that old ghost story?" Tom gave him a sideways glance, his face pale. Mike pressed on, trying to distract himself from the weight of the figure behind them. "You know, the one about the ghost hitchhiker? The legend says some people, out in the middle of nowhere, pick up a hitchhiker on the side of the road, just like we did. Sometimes it's a woman in white, sometimes it's a guy in an old coat, but they always seem off, silent, cold, and then at some point they disappear. Just gone, like they were never there." Tom licked his lips, his fingers twitching against his knee. Mike forced a smirk. "We probably just found ourselves some dumb prankster trying to scare us." Silence. Then Tom shook his head. "No, Mike," he said. "The legend doesn't say they just disappear." Mike glanced at him. Tom's face was tight, his jaw clenched. He exhaled shakily. "The legend says if you don't get rid of them before the road ends..." He swallowed. "They take you with them." The words sat in the air like a weight. The road stretched endlessly ahead, the night pressing down on them, thick and unrelenting. But as the headlights swept over the cracked pavement, something gnawed at Mike's gut. They had been driving for hours. And yet there had been no turns, no exits, nothing but road. Mike's grip on the wheel tightened, his stomach twisted. I think we should have reached a town by now," he muttered. Tom sat up straighter. His fingers darted for his phone. He tapped at the screen. His expression hardened. No service. Mike felt his pulse hammer in his skull. Try the GPS. Tom's fingers moved quickly, his breathing quickening. He held the phone up, watching the loading screen. The little blue dot flickered weakly. Then the map glitched. The screen blinked, the blue dot spinning wildly, repositioning over and over, unable to settle on a location. And then the road all vanished. Not just on the screen, outside the windshield. The pavement ahead dissolved into a swirling mist. A sickly grey fog that crept inward like a living thing. The white dashed lines faded into an abyss. Mike's breath caught in his throat. They weren't on any road anymore. And from the back seat, a slow, rasping chuckle rose. The hitchhiker was laughing, not loudly, not hysterically. Just a slow, hollow sound, a sound that meant one thing. They had already gone too far, and there was no way back. The road had become something else entirely. Mike's hands were clammy on the wheel. The headlights barely penetrated the swirling mist ahead, and the further they drove, the more the lines between reality and nightmare blurred. There were no road signs anymore, no mile markers, no distant glow of a gas station or town. Just a void swallowing them mile by mile. The hitchhiker sat in the back, silent once again. He hadn't moved, but the air around him felt wrong. Heavy, like the car was carrying more than just a passenger. Mike couldn't take it anymore. "I need to stop," he blurted. "I gotta take a piss." Tom turned to him sharply, eyes wide with disbelief. "Are you serious? Now?" Mike's grip on the wheel tightened. Damn it, I need a minute, man." The weight of the hitchhiker's presence was unbearable, pressing against the walls of the car like an invisible force. He had to breathe. He had to get out. Tom exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. "Fine. Just be quick." Mike pulled the car over to the side of the road. Not that there was much of a road left. The shoulder was nothing but dry, cracked dirt, stretching into an empty field of tall, swaying grass. He killed the engine. And for the first time since they picked up the hitchhiker, silence. No static. No whispers. Only the distant hum of the wind rustling through the dead grass like 1,000 unseen things moving through the darkness. Mike opened the door. The moment his foot hit the ground, he shivered. The air was colder than it should have been. A deep, unnatural cold that seeped into his bones despite the summer night. He swallowed and stepped away from the car, feeling the ground crunch beneath his boots. Behind him, Tom sat motionless in the passenger seat, his face barely visible through the dim light of the dashboard. He didn't say anything. The hitchhiker, of course, didn't move either. Mike walked a few feet into the tall grass, glancing over his shoulder. The Impala looked small against the endless darkness beyond it, as if it was the last solid thing in a world that was slowly unraveling. He exhaled, unzipping his jeans, trying to shake the unease crawling up his spine. It's just a piss break. But then, a noise, software rustling, like footsteps. He froze, heart hammering. The wind whispered through the grass, but this sound was different, closer. Mike turned his head sharply. Nothing, just shadows stretching long beneath the moonlight. He let out a shaky breath, shaking his head. "Jesus, man, get a grip!" But then he saw it. Footprints. Fresh ones. Not his own. They trailed toward him through the dirt, deep, deliberate impressions in the dry earth. But there was no sign of anyone, no movement, no shadow, just the prints. Stopping, right behind him. A breath touched the back of his neck, cold, damp. Mike spun around so fast he nearly lost his balance. Nothing. No one was there. But the footprints remained. His breathing hitched, his legs moved before his mind could catch up. He sprinted back toward the car, stumbling through the dead grass, heart slamming against his ribs. The moment his hand hit the door handle, he yanked it open and threw himself inside. "Drive!" he gasped. "Now!" Tom didn't hesitate. The engine roared to life, and the car peeled back onto the endless highway, tires spitting dust and gravel. Mike sat there, chest heaving, his skin crawling with the sensation of something just beyond his sight. He wiped his palms on his jeans, still trembling. "You okay?" Tom asked without taking his eyes off the road. Mike nodded stiffly. He turned to glance out the back window. The field was still, empty. But just before it vanished from sight, a figure, standing at the edge of the road, tall, still, waiting. Mike's breath hitched, his fingers dug into his knees, and then a whisper. "You never should have stopped." The voice came from inside the car. Mike snapped forward, his eyes flicking up. The rearview mirror. The hitchhiker was still there, sitting in the back seat. His face was still hidden beneath the hood. But now, something shifted. And for the first time, Mike saw it. Not a face, not a man, but something else. Something that had been in the car all along, watching, waiting, smiling. And the road stretched endlessly ahead, leading them deeper into nowhere. The Impala tore down the endless road, its engine a lone, desperate sound in the vast emptiness. Mike's breathing was ragged, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles had turned white. He hadn't spoken since he got back into the car, and neither had Tom, because there was nothing to say. The hitchhiker sat in the back, silent as ever, but now there was an unbearable wrongness in the air. The smell had worsened, damp earth and something faintly metallic, like rusted metal left out in the rain. Every now and then Mike swore he could hear the faintest shift of fabric behind him, as if the hitchhiker was adjusting, settling in, getting comfortable. Tom finally broke the silence. "We have to find a town," he muttered. "A gas station. Something." Mike just nodded, eyes locked on the road. Then the static returned. The radio, which had been eerily silent for miles, flickered back to life, a low hum, a whisper of static. Then music. A slow, twanging guitar, warbled as if coming from an old record player. Then a smooth, crooning voice. "Standing on the corner in Winslow, Arizona?" Mike frowned. "The hell?" Tom sat up straighter. "Is that such a fine sight to see?" Tom turned to Mike, confused. "That's Take It Easy, the Eagles, but—" He trailed off, his face tightening. Mike's stomach twisted. Something was wrong. The sound quality was too old. Not just vintage, decayed, warped, like it was being played through a dying speaker, an echo from somewhere it didn't belong. And then the song skipped. The music cut, replaced by a brief hiss of static, before another song bled through. "I was working in the lab late one night." Mike shivered. The monster mash. Tom's mouth went dry. "That's from 1962. They sat there, the Impala gliding through the endless dark, while Bobby Pickett's voice crackled through the speakers, the sound far too distant to be playing from their modern radio. Then the music faded, more static, and then a voice. Low, tinny, a man's voice, stiff and formal, like an old-fashioned news anchor. "We interrupt this broadcast with breaking news." Mike's fingers clenched the wheel. "Authorities are still searching for two young men last seen traveling westbound on Route 66 late last night. Friends report they left Chicago several days ago but have since vanished without a trace." Tom's body went rigid. "Mike!" Police have yet to confirm any leads, but sources say the last known transmission from their vehicle was a frantic call for help, cut off before a location could be identified. The two men, identified as Michael Carter and Thomas Grayson. The blood drained from Mike's face. His foot faltered on the gas pedal. The news report was "eat" about them. "Are considered missing under unusual circumstances. If you have any information regarding their whereabouts, please contact..." Static. Then a laugh. Software dry. From the back seat, Mike's entire body locked up. Tom turned slowly, his breathing shallow. The hitchhiker was smiling, not fully. Not with his mouth, but the way his head tilted, the way his shoulders trembled with quiet amusement. It was enough. Mike's heart pounded. His voice came out hoarse. "What the fucking was that?" The hitchhiker chuckled again, barely above a whisper. "You heard it." Tom swallowed. That was some kind of joke, right? A weird radio broadcast, some prank station playing old recordings, right? The hitchhiker didn't answer. Mike's breath was shallow. He turned the dial on the radio, flipping through the frequencies. Nothing. No more music, no more news reports, just empty, endless, static. His hands were slick with sweat. This isn't happening. The hitchhiker shifted slightly, leaning forward just enough for the dim glow of the dashboard to almost touch the shadow beneath his hood. "Maybe it already did," he murmured. Mike's pulse stopped. A cold shudder rippled through his body. Tom's face was tight, his fingers digging into the seat. "You're messing with us." His voice was unsteady. "This is some bullshit mind game, isn't it?" The hitchhiker let out a slow, satisfied exhale. "What do you think?" Tom turned away, cursing under his breath, his hands pulling at his hair. Mike kept his eyes on the road, his breathing ragged. The asphalt stretched on, black and endless, the mist creeping at the edges of the headlights. And then the sign. A battered old road sign loomed on the side of the highway, barely legible under the rust and grime. Mike squinted, his stomach twisting into knots. It wasn't a town name or a route marker, it was a warning. A faded, barely visible message painted in cracked, peeling white letters. Do not pick up hitchhikers. And beneath that, in even smaller, scratched-out text, they never leave. Mike's hands trembled. His entire body was a storm of panic, his mind racing through every possible way out of this. And then, from the back seat, the hitchhiker exhaled, content. Almost there, he murmured. The road ahead was changing. Mike's vision blurred for just a second, his stomach twisting violently, like something was pulling at him. The white lines on the road seemed to melt into the asphalt, and the mist thickened, curling around the car like fingers. A shape emerged in the fog, at crossroads. And standing at the center of it, a figure, tall, thin, identical to the hitchhiker in the back seat. Mike's blood turned to ice. Tom gasped. The hitchhiker laughed. Now, boys, he whispered. What happens next is up to you. Mike's foot slammed. The brakes, and the world tilted. The Impala spun out of control. The moment Mike slammed the brakes, the world lurched sideways. The road twisted beneath them like a living thing, shifting, warping. And then the tires caught something loose, sending the car into a violent skid. The last thing Mike saw was the crossroads, the eerie figure standing in the mist, and then impact. A deafening screech of metal against pavement. The windshield shattered. The world flipped. Weightless. For one brief second, Mike and Tom were floating, suspended in the air as the car twisted mid-crash, its headlights cutting jagged streaks through the darkness. Then, blackness. A silence so vast, so heavy that for a moment it seemed like nothing existed anymore. Red and blue lights cut through the night. Sirens wailing. The scent of burning rubber and gasoline choked the air. A mangled wreck lay twisted at the edge of the road, a heap of metal that was once an Impala. The entire front end had caved in, the roof partially collapsed. Glass glittered like fallen stars across the pavement. A police cruiser pulled up behind the wreckage, its tires crunching against the gravel. A few moments later, an ambulance rolled onto the scene, its headlights illuminating the twisted remnants of the crash. 2 paramedics climbed out. One of them, a young woman with tired eyes, grabbed her kit. The other, a heavy-set man in his 40s, sighed as he surveyed the wreck. Jesus Christ, he muttered. Nobody walked away from this. A police officer approached, shaking his head grimly. No IDs found yet. No bodies either. The female paramedic froze mid-step. Wait. What? The officer shrugged, gesturing toward the wreck. We found 2 sets of beam blood. The amount of damage here, there's no way they survived, but no sign of them. The paramedics exchanged uneasy glances. The officer sighed, rubbing his face. They must have been ejected from the vehicle. We'll need a search team for the surrounding area. The female paramedic swallowed hard, stepping closer to the wreckage. Her boots crunched over broken glass as she scanned the twisted remains of the dashboard. And then she saw it. Something half buried beneath the crumpled front seat. A piece of newspaper. The edges were tattered, brittle with age. The ink had faded in places, but she could still make out the date. 1962. Her heart pounded as she carefully lifted the fragile paper. The front page was yellowed and torn, but the headline was still clear. Two young men killed in tragic Highway 66 accident, police baffled. Her breath hitched. Beneath the headline was a grainy black-and-white photo. A wrecked car. An Impala, just like this one. She stared at it, ice creeping into her veins. And then, at the bottom of the article, two names. Michael Carter, Thomas Grayson. The paramedic dropped the paper. It fluttered onto the shattered glass, the words staring up at her like a message from the warm dead. The officer frowned. "What's wrong?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. And somewhere, far down the road, through the mist and the empty highway, a radio crackled to life. A slow, warbled tune drifted through the silence. "I was working in the lab late one night." The officer turned toward the sound, his expression darkening. "It's that radio station shouldn't be working. That car doesn't even have power." A faint laugh echoed on the wind, low, amused, like someone was still sitting in the back seat. Watching, waiting,